That's right. I think more or less, you guys, this song really is almost word for word from one translation or another from the Bible. So think about what it says. Most people, when they read Romans, they get stuck. They think that they're like the Romans 7 man. They think that they're forever going to be struggling against sin, but they forget about Romans 6, that we've been set free from sin. So you don't have to wait till you die. Jesus is already inside you, and you're already inside him.
I was like one who couldn't do what they wanted to, but did the opposite every chance I got. I was like one who couldn't do what they wanted to, but did the opposite every chance I got. Who could save me from this sin that I was stuck in? Who can save me from this sin that I was stuck in? Thank God Jesus did. You were a slave in the land of sin and death, but he got you out, and he set you free in the land of righteousness. You were a slave in the land of sin and death, but he got you out, and he set you free in the land of righteousness. Co-crucified, he cut away your sinful flesh. Ouch! Co-crucified, you died and rose again when he did. Thank God
that wasn't clear, you're in Christ right now. So let that sink in. I know it's an election year right now, so I thought it'd be appropriate to sing a song about election.
chosen us to be participants in your continued ministry, to expand your kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. And as we give these gifts of thanksgiving and praise, we ask that you'll bless them, that you'll give us wisdom in how to use them, and that your name will be praised. And in your name we pray. Amen.
Every day
stuff on the news that we tend to see. And I hope they see it, because I want to see it too. Well, are we Christians singing that? Love hanging on a tree. That is our God. That's our salvation. And that's what I hope everyone will see one of these days. And that's what we have our eyes set on. Love hanging on a tree. Our victorious Savior on his throne. Love hanging on a tree. That's his throne. So if you guys don't mind, let's sing that together a little bit longer. If you don't mind going backwards, Christy, a little bit. Good. Still there. Let's sing I want to see love, just that part. I want to see, so next, yeah, back, there we go. Let's just see the bottom part. I want to see. And remember, as we're singing this, see it.
I want to see the love all around you, all around you. See it. I want to know that love is all around you. It's all around. Again. I want to see the love. Do you see it? All around you. All around you. It's all around you. I want to know that love is all around you. It's all around. There it is. It's all around you. It's all around you. So that's been a theme, right? It's been the theme of these songs, kind of. He's all around us. He's in us. We're in him. So let that sink in. Today, tomorrow, that you're in him, he's in you. It's all around. If you want to keep on, Jared, I'll let you say whatever you want.
Let's pray. Father in heaven, we are so grateful that your love is all around us. Your love created this world, and your love redeems this world. And your love empowers us to continue the work that you start. And Lord, I pray that you will inspire each of us to participate in what you are doing all around us. And in your name we pray. Amen. Few announcements to mention. Kay's correcting my grammar, so she's whispering in my ear even though she's not. Tuesday. Talking Tuesday is this Tuesday at 7 p.m. and we're going to talk about, or we're finding answers together, and we're going to discuss one of those weird verses in the Bible found in 1 Corinthians. So it'll be fun. This evening, before Tuesday, this evening we will have game night, and since the basement's all tore up, we're going to have it upstairs, so be nice to each other. So because we have less space. Spiritual Life meeting is going to be September 4th at 7 p.m. on Facebook Messenger. And the Friends Women's Retreat is September 20th through the 22nd in Wichita. Are there any other announcements that we should mention? Yep. Next slide, Christy.
I will mention too, this is our next, this September's mission offering will go to help Bob and Debbie Audikar retired this year from missions work per se, but Bob's going to go back and make a couple of trips back to encourage the church in the country that they've been serving in, and we want to help pay for one of those trips, and so that's what the offering is for this time. So you can put that on your check or put it on the envelope if you're using cash in an envelope. I also want to mention there's some food out in the foyer if you have need of food, or if you just just take it whether you need it or not, if you can use it. And it's been donated. There's some other things besides food out there, and there even is some cat food if you have a cat. The cats who had the food don't like it, but your cat might, so take that too. But remember to give this month for Bob Audikar's trip.
Just to kind of mention how important their ministry has been. Nepal does have lots of different problems, so and several people have come to the United States from Nepal as refugees, and we have 2 complete full churches in our yearly meeting of Nepal, or 3 actually, of Nepali people. So their ministry is good and very important. There are a couple of announcements that I failed to mention. Scamp Camp at Camp Quaker Haven's coming up. If you're over 50, which isn't me, even though I look like I am, you can go to Scamp Camp at Quaker Haven. The speaker is Frank Penna. Frank's a character, so I really encourage you to go because he's awesome. His last pastorate was at First Friends in Denver, and he grew up on the mission field in Bolivia, I believe. Is that where he grew up? Anyway, he's a very cool guy. His son is our director of youth ministries at the yearly meeting, and his wife was Janet Penna, who recently retired as office administrator at the yearly meeting office, so they've been around quite a bit. And also for Talking Tuesday, we do have our next book. This is one book. We wanted to read parts of George Fox's journal, and those that are part of it, pick up your copy of George Fox's journal. This is the unedited version. Most of them are edited, so this has everything. So, yeah, most of them are smaller than just one of the volumes, but this has all of it, so which is good. If you aren't part of it but would like to join, you can get the book on free ebooks at friendslibrary.com. And they also have free audiobooks there, so please join us. So if you'd like to turn to Mark chapter 7, we'll read verses 1 through 8, 14 and 15, and then 21 through 23. I don't know why the lectionary skips everything, but they get the main point. Mark chapter 7. Now when the Pharisees gathered to him with some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem, they saw that some of the disciples ate with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands properly, holding to the traditions of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many other traditions that they observed, such as washing of cups and pots and copper vessels and dining couches. And the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples not walk according to the traditions of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" And he said to them, "Well, did Isaiah prophesy of you, hypocrites? As it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrine the commandments of men. You leave the commandments of God and hold to the tradition of men.'" And he called the people to him again and said to them, "Hear me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him. But the things that come out of a person are what defile him. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." You have a song for us today? I guess Farasha's happy about that. Which one? 101. It's not in our book? Okay. So 101 on your app if you have it. Give him another hand. We are the most blessed of all the Friends meetings in this area, so I am happy to be a part of this. Let us pray. Father in heaven, we are so thankful that we have this place where we can come and lay aside the worries of our world for a while. Focus on who you are and who we are in your eyes. And Lord, as we consider what your Spirit inspired in Scripture, what your Spirit inspired people to write in the music, and what your Spirit's currently teaching us here today, we ask that you will bless us and keep us, that you will teach us and guide us, so that your kingdom will be seen through each one of us as we live among the people in our neighborhoods. And in your name we pray. Amen. We spent a great deal of time over the past couple of years in the Old Testament. In the past few weeks, we've been speaking in the letter to the Ephesians. And it's been a challenge for me to speak out of these books. It's been a challenge because there's so much history, culture, and deeper study than I'm used to doing. But it's been good. When we gain a greater understanding of the culture and the cultures surrounding the Hebrew Scriptures, we gain a deeper understanding of the gospel. And there's so much more to speak about. But I feel we need to, as we move forward, we need to remind ourselves of Christ once again. We need to be reminded of how Jesus spoke of the Hebrew Scriptures, so that we do not lose track of the fuller message. Today we return to the Gospel according to Mark. Tradition tells us that Mark was one of the younger disciples, not one of the 12 apostles, but he was most likely among the 70 that Jesus sent out to minister among the people in his name. Excuse me. The other interesting bit of tradition is that John Mark, or Mark as we know him, was the disciple that ran away from the Garden of Gethsemane during Jesus' betrayal. Not only did he run away, but he ran away without his clothes, meaning somebody grabbed a hold of his shirt and he squirmed out of it and ran away without anything on. Mark was an active participant in the ministry and traveled with Paul and Barnabas, and he likely went on those journeys because he's believed to have been the cousin of Barnabas. And although Mark is and always was of Hebrew heritage, he, like many that lived in the areas more heavily populated by Romans and Greeks, he had two names, a Hebrew name, which was John, and a Greek name, Mark. And because of this double name, some believe that it might have been Mark that was at the root of the accusation against Paul for bringing a Gentile into the temple. Mark was also the center of a disagreement between Paul and Barnabas on their missionary journey. Paul didn't want to take Mark, and Barnabas did. So after that argument, they went two separate ways. But eventually there had been a reconciliation between Mark and Paul, because later Paul writes regarding Mark as a fellow laborer and useful to the ministry. Most of what we know about Mark has been with either Paul or Barnabas. Yet tradition states that Mark penned this gospel account according to the teachings of Peter. This has always bothered me to some degree because we don't see Mark with Peter. But there are a few instances where this is plausible. In Acts chapter 12, we are told that several of the disciples were gathered together in prayer at Mark's mother's home. They were praying, and one of the servants heard a knock at the gate, and they were gathered in prayer because Peter was captured and imprisoned by Herod. And an angel came to Peter in prison while he was chained between two guards. And the angel struck Peter in the side. And I always imagine he just gave him a kick and told him to wake up. Because that's what I imagine angels do. They act like me. And that's what I do to my brother. So he wakes Peter up. And he tells him to get up. And as he rose, the chains fall off. And as he dressed, they walked out of the dungeon, and they walked to Mark's mother's house. And Rhoda, this poor servant girl, was there praying with the people, and probably praying right alongside of them. And she heard this knock, and because it was her job to answer the door, she went to the door. And she recognized Peter's voice. But she had to have permission before she could open the gate. And she went back to the people and she told them that Peter was standing outside, and they didn't believe her. They thought she was crazy, but she insisted, and they began to lose hope, and they said that it's his departed spirit or his angel that was knocking. Yet Peter continued to knock, and eventually others heard him, and they realized that Peter was there in the flesh. And so they went and they opened the door, and he came in among them. And some believe that it was at that night where Mark heard the gospel account from Peter. This is the tradition that those that believe that Mark was written first often espouse. But there's other possible traditions. Mark again met up with Peter when they were both in Rome. And according to this tradition, Matthew was written first, and Paul had encouraged Luke to write his gospel. And the people in Rome were divided over which gospel was better, because each of the gospel narratives focus on something different. And in this tradition, Peter, who was at that time considered the bishop of Rome, stood and began teaching from Matthew's gospel, and he compared it to Luke's gospel, and Mark was there taking notes. According to this tradition, Matthew was written first, followed by Luke, and Mark, since it was the bridge between the two, was placed between them, giving us that traditional order in the book of scriptures of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then John. Mark was the bridge. He was there to bring clarity to both of the accounts. This is all interesting, but it doesn't get to the heart of the message. I wanted to give you this history so that we can understand that Mark wasn't one of the original disciples, but he was always there. He participated in the ministry from the beginning. Although it's believed that he wrote to the Gentiles, he knew the Hebrew origins of faith because that was his background. And the gospel, the story of Jesus, was not something that he just heard secondhand, but it was all around him. And the things that he discusses within the gospel are likely things that he experienced. In today's passage, Jesus had just fed the 5,000, and he walked across the water to Bethsaida. Mark doesn't tell us what they did in Bethsaida. It's on the other side of the sea from Capernaum. They just say that he went there, and then immediately they come back to Gennesaret. I can't pronounce Hebrew names or Greek names. And this town's just south of Capernaum. Here they get out of the boat, and everyone immediately recognizes him. And the whole region begins to bring the sick on their beds to him. I want you to imagine that scene, because that's what leads into today's passage. The sick are being brought to Jesus. They're reaching out to him, touching his clothes, pushing in, and touching him. And as these people are pressing in, among the crowd are scribes and Pharisees from Jerusalem. A multitude of people, sick, hurting, marginalized, are pressing in. The disciples and Jesus had just gotten off their boat after crossing the sea. We're not told how long they'd been out or what they were doing. But since the disciples at this point were often fishermen, and they had been in sea, I think it's safe to assume that they probably did a little work along the way. They'd cast out their nets. They brought in some of the produce of the sea to bring in some income. And because the sick were being brought to the marketplace, I imagine that they were there in the marketplace selling their fish. These men had been traveling, working, bombarded by a multitude of people requiring help, and among those people were Pharisees. The religious leaders see what's going on all around them. They see the crowd, they see the marketplace, they see Jesus and his disciples. But what do they speak about when they come to Jesus? Why do your disciples eat with hands that are defiled? I grew up on a farm, and I worked in the lawn and landscape industry. I know dirty hands. I also know that there are moments when lunch comes and it's not always possible to completely wash when you just have enough time to wolf down a quick bite as you press on to get the job done. I imagine that this is what's happening to the disciples. They'd come off the boat. They quickly unloaded their goods and they carried them to the market to sell. And just as their sales were coming to a close, the crowds come rushing in. And they begin to organize a crowd, applying some semblance of order amidst of chaos. And then someone hands them a piece of bread to eat. And without even thinking, they put it in their mouth and they eat because they're starving after a long day's work. But the religious leaders are watching. They see the people. They see all the unclean people. And they see these supposed disciples touching them, hanging out with them, encouraging them. They see them interacting, and they see them eat food while standing among these people. That's what's bothering them. Not the pain, not the hurting, not the injury and despair. They're upset that the disciples did not wash their hands, that the disciples would eat while being in a state of defilement. As I sat considering this passage, my mind, like usual, went all over the place. And I was telling Eric yesterday at practice that I was having trouble focusing on what I was supposed to say, what I needed to say. I spent most of this week reading the writings in the Old Testament, looking at the various laws. I even looked up some of the teachings of the rabbis, trying to grasp why or what was causing the Pharisees to be so upset about this issue. The problem with the law is that we often think when it says that a person is unclean, that it means that the same thing as sin. This leads people to come to a conclusion that if you are sick, it's because you have sin in your life. If something bad has happened, you have sinned. If you pray for healing and you are not healed, it's because you have unconfessed sin in your life, and God cannot come in to heal you because you're unclean. This is problematic. I read many of the cleanliness laws this week. I looked up what they pertain to and what the rituals were to alleviate this unclean status. The interesting thing is unclean is exactly what it sounds like. It's about hygiene, not sin. A few years ago, when the pandemic was in the height, many within the Christian communities were debating the idea surrounding compliance with the various guidelines or the free expression of faith. Many of the laws of hygiene could have been beneficial in that debate because they speak of discharge of fluids, illness, and sanitation of the house. Many of the laws like many of the suggested guidelines during COVID, or the guidelines that we all have to comply with at the public schools today regarding illness, say similar things. If you're bleeding all over the place, stop the bleeding. Wash your hands, wash your clothes, wash everything you touched in that state. And then take it easy the rest of the day and heal. If you're sick, everyone you have come in contact with should bathe, wash their clothes, wash the bedding, clean all the exposed surfaces in the house. And until you're no longer symptomatic, stay at home until the end of the day. This is basic hygiene, not sin. It's taking care of yourself, not law regarding whether or not you're a sinner or not. It's about preventing the spread of disease. It's about getting rest and taking care of yourself before you get back into society in a weakened state. But even in this state of uncleanness, there are times where you can't stay home. You need to see a doctor. And at times people will need to assist you in your weakness. They're not contributing to sin, yet they too are unclean. They too need to wash, and they will be considered unclean until the next day. This even goes to food, and I found this even more interesting. If a lizard or a swarming creature gets into your food or water, it's unclean. I like how they use swarming creature. It means rodents. And you are not supposed to eat that food. You're supposed to discard it. And you're not even supposed to keep the vessel that food or drink was contained in. You're supposed to go out and break it and throw it away to the pit of the unclean, so that nobody will eat something that might be unclean or something that was contaminated. I sat and I considered this for a while. Before Albert started school, we'd often take him to the zoo to participate in Critter Club. And this Critter Club is a preschool-aged event once a week where the educators at the zoo would teach kids about various animals. And they'd bring some of the animals in and allow them to see them and interact with them. Several times, much to my discomfort, they would bring in a snake. Even I have to admit that some of these species of reptiles were amazing. But there is something interesting about these classes. Whenever they brought a snake or another reptile into the space, they'd have another person standing next to the one with the animal with a bottle of hand sanitizer. Each child or parent that touched the snake had to sanitize their hands immediately after because of the risk of bacterial infection. If you were to eat after touching this animal, you could get food poisoning. In the pages of Scripture, we see something similar. If one of these creatures were in your food or drink, you had to dump it out, get rid of the container. But it goes even deeper. There's different rules about dead animals and grain and the water supply. If you're to find swarming animals or mice in your grain, it's not considered unclean unless the grain is moist. That caveat intrigued me. It's almost impossible to keep rodents out of grain. And I speak from experience when I speak on this because I grew up on the farm. You have to make every effort to keep rodents out of the grain. And it's also difficult to keep grain dry. But when a rodent does get into the grain, you'll often have wet grain as well because there's a hole in the wall that lets moisture in. Only the moist grain is unclean, not all of it, just what got wet. When I was in high school, I gained a greater understanding of this. We had an entire bin of spoiled grain. Thousands of bushels of grain, multiple truckloads in this bin, and the whole thing was spoiled. It would have been about $20,000 worth of damage. It spoiled because mice entered, and they multiplied rapidly. They would eat the grain, and the water from the outside and the waste of the rodents would mix together, and the chemicals and the heat combined, and the entire bin began to mold. Once the mold began to take hold, it spread rapidly through the entire complex, and I had to clean that bin. And we had to wash it down and fill the holes and get it ready for the next year's harvest, because we had to have the bin. We'd scoop it out, load it into a truck, and the only thing that we could do was dump it on the ground and allow the cattle to eat it if they wanted to. I scooped that nasty, spoiled grain out all day, and if the wind blew just right or wrong, it took every ounce of my willpower not to throw up. And the next morning, my mom had to call a doctor because I had an allergic reaction to all the spores. And to this day, I cannot smell alcohol without cringing and remembering that experience. Moist grain was unclean because it could unintentionally spoil. But grain that was dry, even if a mouse died in it, was considered clean, and that's because it had to be processed yet. If it was already processed, it was unclean. But it had to be processed, so it was clean. But this still doesn't tell us why the Pharisees were upset. The thing about the hygiene teachings is that everyone was unclean until they washed, and they remained unclean until evening, which is the close of the day. No matter what the disciples did at this point, they were unclean, as was every person in that crowd. They could wash their hands all they wanted, but they would remain unclean until the sun went down. Which makes me wonder what the entire point of this argument was. And this is where the tradition of the elders come in. The traditions of the elders are the oral teachings that the various rabbis passed down to their disciples. They're the teachings that were passed down from Moses to Joshua, and from Joshua down through the ages, and each rabbi added just a bit more. These were not Torah. They were just the teachings that one leader gave to the next. And many of these teachings were given from religious leader to religious leader. And they included some of the most strict aspects of religious observance that the law only required for the priest as they entered into that most holy place. The cleanliness laws for the priest were more stringent than what was for everyone else, because they were going into the area that was considered sacred. You didn't want to contaminate the holy place with the things of the world. And these teachings of the elders were given so that the priests and the rabbis would prepare themselves for service. They would need to be mindful of what they did and who they associated with, because they were scheduled to perform duties before God for the people. They didn't have the luxury of just waiting another day. And when the priesthood could not function in exile, the rabbis moved the teachings for the temple into the synagogue. And since there was no separation between sacred and profane in the synagogue, as there was in the temple, everyone had to participate in worship. Were being taught the same things. It offended the Pharisees that the disciples disregarded the teachings of the elders, because the teaching of the elders moved from the priests to the masses. And they came to Jesus and they asked him why. And Jesus responds to their query by quoting Isaiah. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching doctrine, the commandments of men. And he concludes this by saying, you leave the commandment of God and you hold to the traditions of men. Jesus then teaches his disciples, hear me, all of you, and understand. Hear and understand are the only imperative verbs in this passage. To hear and to understand is to know and put into action, to live it out in your daily life. Hear me, all of you, and understand. There's nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him. But the things that come out of the person are what defile him. And Jesus continues, what comes out of the person is what defiles him. For what from within, out of the heart of man comes evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. Guard your heart. The wisdom teachers say, guard your heart because it's the core of who you are. It's where your passions reside, both good and bad. Guard your heart because it is from your heart that you express yourself. It's from the heart that you love, hate, encourage, and discourage. Your heart tells you that you can do all things. And your heart also tells you that you're a worthless worm, unloved by anyone. Guard your heart, because that is you. Hear and understand, Jesus says. You honor me with your lips, but your heart is far from me. In vain you worship, but you teach as doctrine the commandments of men. When we begin to focus on the commandments of men, our perspective becomes skewed. We begin to think that the only right way to worship is what we do, and everyone else is wrong. We begin to think that our political perspective is the only godly political perspective. And if you disagree, you are wrong. We begin to think. We begin to think that the reason we're not healed is because we've not done enough, or that we haven't prayed enough, or we have unconfessed sin. We do not even consider that the possibility might be that life is just hard. When we focus on man's commandments instead of the truth and the wisdom of God, we begin to think that some people are just better and they deserve more, while others are less. And we fail to see that God so loved the world that he gave his only unique Son, not to condemn the world, but to save it. We can often get a skewed perspective. We can focus on the unwashed hands instead of the hurting people. And when we do that, we begin to think that I or we are better because we're not in that situation. We can make a list. I have a better education. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. I have a job. Or anything else, quite frankly, may not be even remotely true. We can often have a skewed perspective because what Jesus is telling us, what he wants us to hear and to understand, what we see others doing, what we see out on the outside is not the whole story. Some of the most righteous-looking people have been some of the most depraved. Some of the people that seem to be the most unsavory could be the saintliest of saints. Guard your heart, because you flow out from your heart. Each of us are capable of greatness and depravity. It depends on what's in your heart. The Pharisees looked at the hurting people, and they did not see what God saw. They did not see people loved by God. All they saw was unwashed hands of sinners. And they did nothing but complain. They did not help. They didn't even offer water to wash. Love God with everything you are and all that you have, and love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the most important teachings of God. If you're concerned with clean hands, then maybe pick up the hand sanitizer and stand next to the snake. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. Let us stand together as we move from worship into the ministry that God has for us in our community, as we close with The Wine is Alive.
Making sure I have the right note.
He changed my laments into whirling dance. He ripped off my sad black mourning band. He dressed me with joy and filled me with song. I can't stop thinking my God so strong. The wine is alive. It's Jesus Christ. Oh, it's Jesus Christ. The wine is alive. It's Jesus Christ. Oh, it's Jesus Christ. Drink deep. Drink deep. Drink deep. Drink deep. Hey, do you know this shocking truth? You're cleansed, accepted, and justified too. Not guilty, forgiven, and reconciled. Embraced by the Father, it's party time. The wine is alive. It's Jesus Christ. Oh, it's Jesus Christ. The wine is alive. It's Jesus Christ. Oh, it's Jesus Christ. Drink deep. Drink deep. Drink deep. Drink deep. We're not alone and adrift in the universe. We're at home in the Father's good pleasure. Some of you need to hear that. We're not alone and adrift in the universe. We're at home in the Father's good pleasure. And the wine is alive. It's Jesus Christ. Oh, it's Jesus Christ. The wine is alive. It's Jesus Christ. Oh, it's Jesus Christ. Drink deep. Drink deep. Drink deep. Drink deep. The wine is alive. The wine is alive. The wine is alive. The wine is alive. It's Jesus Christ. 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 It's Jesus Christ.
May we go forth with our hearts cleansed by grace, ever aware that true purity comes from within. As we journey through life, may we embrace the wisdom and seek love and compassion Let the purity of our inner self guide our actions, and may our lives be a reflection of the boundless mercy and truth that dwells within. May we go in peace, embracing the transformation